This tutorial is designed to be an introduction to animating a rigged character. Now I'm using a rig called Max for Maya, and I like it because it's a very simple to use rig. It's got a lot of really easy to use controls. It doesn't have as many controls or places where you can change it as a lot of other free rigs that you'll find or professional rigs. And that's one of the reasons why I like it, especially to start out with, because there's less places where things can go wrong. Now Max is set up, the legs are set up to be inverse kinematic, which means that if I move this bottom one, each of these curves here are controls that I can change. So I can grab this one and then press a W, and I can lift it up, and you can see that the other parts of the joints and the bones, it works backwards to tell, okay, if the foot's going to be here, that means this joint's going to have to be here, and this joint's going to have to be here. It can make your life a lot easier. Sometimes it can make it a little bit harder. The arms are designed by default to be forward kinematic, which means I can't actually move this one. I can rotate it, but I can't move it because the way that I move this arm is by rotating earlier in the chain. So I have to move that joint, then I can move this joint, and then I can move this joint. The plus side to that is because the arm, this wrist here is connected to the elbow and to the shoulder. It actually is also connected to the waist, and if I rotate the waist, the arms go with it. Notice that when I rotate the waist, the legs don't go with it because the legs are inverse kinematic and they are kind of doing their own thing. I can actually change the settings for the arms to also be inverse kinematic, or IK. The way I do that is by clicking on this blue box around Max here, and in the channel box, which I can get to by clicking on channel box or pressing Control A, one of your channels is arm left, arm right, IK, FK. If these are 0, they're set up for FK. If they're 1, they're set up for IK. So I can change these both to 1, and you can see that the controllers actually change for the arm. Now I have this single control which I can move, and then it will figure out all the rest for me. And this controller also appears. You can see this on the knees too. This is where the elbows will point to. So I don't want to do that because it twists it, but depending on where I put this, the elbow will point to it. And so if I prefer working with the IK with this. These are all facial controls. We're probably not going to mess with those so much right now. I also want to make sure down here in the corner, it looks like a guy running from the sun, like Mario in that level in Mario 3, but if I click on it, I need to make sure that my playback speed is set up to real time instead of just playing every frame as quickly as it can possibly play. And then however many frames I need, these two boxes represent that. This box on the right, I can type in a number here, and that will increase how many frames I have altogether. The number on the left are how many frames are visible at once on my timeline. So I can say, you know what, I only want to see 50 frames at a time, but I have 200 total frames, and then I can just slide through this to do that. I can also click on here and kind of zoom in and out on my timeline if I want to see more at a time. But now I have my timeline. Before I do anything, I want to set my very first key, which I'm going to scroll back here to 1. I'm just going to go ahead and set this to 100 frames at a time. And on frame 1, I want to kind of just set everything to zero it all out to say this is the default. So I'm going to draw a big box around every single control and press S. S is how we set a key. You'll notice that it has turned all of these symbols, or the numbers in the channel box, to red. That means that they've been recorded and set as a keyframe. You see this red line here as well. An important thing to remember is that every one of these controls has its own keyframe. If I'm not clicked on anything, then there's no keyframe. If I'm clicked on this arm control, then the only keyframe this is for that arm. It's not this wrist one. It has its own separate one. The waist here, the legs have their own separate control. And so it's also really easy to forget to set a keyframe when you make a change. I'll probably do it during this tutorial because I do it all the time, but try not to, because then you just do a lot of work and you don't save it basically. So I have a reference video. I found this on YouTube. It's called 3D Acting Animation Reference, and I'll include a link to it. And I really like this because they've set up, they have the keys here. You'll see every once in a while a big K will appear, and those are your keyframes. You start off by chunking out. You're just trying to get your overall animation at your key poses. That's where big changes happen. So in a walk cycle, that's every time the foot hits the ground would be a key. when you go through back to that contact phase. In some cases, it's when a big change happens. So here she's planting that foot, and she's about to spin. When she completes the spin, when a pose kind of cements itself in place, that's another good place to set a key. If you're having a hard time trying to figure out what your main poses are, it's not probably the best way to do it, but you could just say, you know what, every 2 seconds I'm going to set this. And the number one thing I see that causes problems when people are starting animation is they just kind of want to wing it. They're just like, okay, I'm on frame 1, let's just go ahead and, I don't know, frame 5, we'll just move it here. And you end up with animations that seem really weird. You want to set up your main poses first. And so I'm going to show you what that means here in this first part of this tutorial. So I'm going to start a little later on in this. I've brought this into Premiere so that I can kind of move it frame by frame, which is really nice. I can hit left or right and move it. But I don't want to do this walk cycle part at first here. What I want to do is when she starts doing this turn. So I think I'm going to begin on frame 31 of this and try to get this pose set up. Now this one also has, like, I can see it from another angle too. So she's got her hands on her hips here, and I'm going to set my first frame to look like this. So I'm going to make Max look like that, at least roughly. So I've got the right foot is forward. She's kind of starting to turn a little bit, so she's on the edge of her foot. This foot's starting to turn too. I can see the same frame over here. So frame 31, she's starting to turn a little bit with her feet. And so I'm going to try to replicate that. And I don't have to be exact because I can always come back and fix it. But I'm going to try to get that. So this foot is forward. Notice that it's got some stretch set up with it, so you can actually keep stretching it. But I don't want to stretch it too much. I can press E to do rotation. And so I'm just, I can hit W to go back to my move. I'm going to go ahead and bend the whole body down. So I want the whole body to be a little lower. To move the body, because this is now the arms are IK, if I move this, the arms don't move with it. An easy workaround on that is if I have this body control and I hold down Shift and I select those 2 arm controls, now when I move them, they'll all move at the same time. Make sure I'm back on frame 1, and I'm just going to drop it slightly here. So I'll get this foot kind of where I want it to be. I think I had made changes without recording it, which I said I would. I'm just being honest. A lot of these controls, so there's things like toe bend and stuff that have numbers that you can change. You can just type in numbers, but that's not the easiest way to do it. If you click on the word for toe, whatever one you want to change, and then come back out here to your perspective view, hold down your middle mouse button and slide to the left or the right. That will also change the number. To the left, negative, to the right, positive. And that's another way you can change each of these. And because they're on that foot control, when I hit S, it'll save them along with the rest of the controls. So I may want to, I'm going to tilt this leg to the left a little bit and maybe even this way, so she's starting to get kind of a turn here. The other foot is kind of leaned back with a little bit of toe bend. So here's where I'm going to use that middle mouse. And now when I rotate this, I've got that little bit of toe bend. Hit S again because I want to make sure to save that. Her arms, I'll come up here, do a little bit of rotation on the hand. And I can mess with the, I don't want to really do the fingers right now because I can come back and do the fingers later. I don't want to overcomplicate it when I'm just getting these initial poses kind of roughed out because any added complexity is just going to like ruin my day. So I'm just trying to avoid complexity basically. I went back and changed the other hand, so I had to hit S again before I left it because remember that hand's controls are different from the other hand's controls. And then, so that looks fairly good. I think I want to pull this leg out a little bit more. And she's kind of looking to the side, so I'm going to grab this neck control, which only allows me to rotate. Maybe that's not the one I want. Maybe this halo around the head does most of your rotation and movement, so I can pull it forward a little bit. If I look at that, that's something resembling that first pose, and I don't have any exaggeration or other details yet that I want to add, but I just have the basics of it down, and that took a little while to watch. I apologize. But the next step now is to find the next pose. So where's the next big change that happens? In this one, I can see that she starts to do, like that foot plants, but then she starts to pivot on this foot. And when she plants this other foot down, I agree that that's probably a really good key for the next one. So at frame, I was at 31 at first. I'm going to, is that the one I did was 31? So from 31 to 47 is 16 frames in, and I totally did not pause that and do a calculator because I can't do math in my head. That is not what happened. So let's go forward to frame 31, or 16, I mean. Is that what I said? 16? Wow, I'm really good at math. So I'm jumping ahead almost a half a second here, or more than half a second, to get my next pose. So the thing I do is I move forward in the timeline to 16 frames later, which is corresponding to this, and now I'm going to try to match that pose. I'm not going to worry about any of the in-between stuff, because once again, that just confuses everything when you're working on this. I'll start by trying to get the body where I want it to be, so I'll take that body, hold down Shift and select the two arm controls also, and then use W to move them. So they're past this foot. This is that foot that's on the ground. They're past that foot, which is this foot, and the whole body's also rotated. Let's see, I'm probably going to have to do these all separately. Yeah, of course. So I'm going to take that body and rotate it and hit S, and I'll try to get kind of the arms where they were. And that foot looks really bad, but it's because I haven't animated it yet, so that's perfectly normal. This foot, as I mentioned, it's going to be flat again because she's hit the ground with it, and it's also been rotated. And if I do this, I'm probably going to have to go back in and fix that because it's going to start rotating it even earlier than I want, but I can always fix that later. This foot is swung forward. It's also been rotated. I do not want this toe bend anymore, so I'm just going to click on it and change it back to 0. It is touching the ground and kind of angled up. Also notice that I'm probably going to have to adjust where my knee is. So I'm going to take this one, this is my knee control, and slide it so it's in the front again so that the whole leg isn't bent. And I'll hit S on that to lock that. And it takes some real kind of details-oriented thinking about how everything should be lined up for this. And I'm using, I mean, really all I'm using is W for move and E for rotate, and then I press S when I want to keep the foot the way it is. Now between those two poses, I have no, I know that Maya isn't going to have done the in-between the way that I want it to, but that's not terrible for now. I'm getting some of the rotation. Looks like I want to increase how much she's rotating here. Her head kind of turns even more at this point. So I'm going to come up now and do her head. And it still seems really stiff and robotic, and that's because I haven't gone in and kind of done my principles of animation on any of this yet. Eventually I'll want to do that. But for now, I think it'll just cause confusion. You know what, to make this easier, I'm going to add a work plane. Just click on this plane symbol in the polygons and make it bigger so I have an idea of what the ground should be, because I'm having some issues with not being consistent on where my ground is. And if I go back and I want to change a key, I'm not even going to worry about any of these in-between things right now, because that will be too confusing. I'm just trying to hit my main keys, and if I want to go back and fix them at some point, I can go back right over to where the keyframe was, and if I hit S, it'll replace what was in there with my new key. So this is probably the least interesting thing to watch, but I'm going to probably pause it here in a second and try to get the next key figured out too. But it's really a process of just kind of visually seeing. So I have here, and she kind of turns. This foot should definitely be more up. And at this point, so the next key, she puts her weight on that foot and shuffles everything to get to there. So yeah, that would be a good pose when she kind of stops pivoting with that foot and sets this other foot down, which would be frame 60, which is 13 frames away from the last key I did. So in Maya now, I'll go 13 more frames. It'll put me at frame 29. And I'm going to try to replicate this pose next, which is that she's almost completely turned at this point. She's squared up on her legs. Her balance is still mostly on this leg. Her weight is on this one, but this leg is starting to take that weight as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it here and try to get this pose done on frame 29. I'm unpausing because one thing I should point out is I keep clicking on my ground layer. I'd rather that be locked on, or my ground plane, I'd rather that just be locked on a layer I can't really mess with. So if I have it selected, I can come here to my layers and say create layer from selected. And then I can change that to R on this third option so that I can't accidentally select that. So now it should make it easier for me to get these the way that I want them to in here. Okay, so now I have something resembling this frame. Once again, I'm going to move forward again to the next time. So now she kind of swings over, her weight shifts over to this foot. That one pivots. That one's not a lot. That's only like, what, 14 frames. So I'm going to go forward and that pose as well, and then we'll talk about what we'll do next. So that would put me at frame 43 to try to replicate this pose, which is more of a, like her body is sliding over to be mostly above this foot. There is a little bit more rotation happening there too, so I'm going to try to do both of those things. I'm going to rotate it slightly, and I'm going to move it to be just a little bit more that way, and I'll have to move the hands too. And once again, I'm pressing S after each movement. Better to press S too many times than not enough times, because if you press S and you haven't changed anything and you're in the same spot, it's just going to rewrite over the key with the exact same key. And she's also turning her head at this point to be facing this way, like she's looking for somebody. This square here is really great for doing kind of hip bending stuff. So I can hit S there, turn the head this way. And it still looks really rough, like it looks bad because I haven't really done the precision stuff that makes an animation not look bad. Also, it might look bad even when I'm done. But that's just me. So we've got kind of a shift there. And then she's going to fold her arms and kind of lean back that way. And that's the last frame I'll do. So that one is 34 frames away, which is over a second. I'll add 34 frames to 43. That seems like that would have been easy to do math-wise, but that's 77. And then that's probably where I'll stop for now, is to get this pose, and then I'll come back again. Okay, so not perfect, but here's that last frame, something resembling it. And now, if I play this, it's not going to look great. But the thing that I do have, I actually have two things here. The first one is timing. Because I've timed that, this big distance between here, there's no way Maya was going to be able to figure out from frame whatever to frame whatever what I wanted my feet to do, or my arms to do. But with those main poses figured out, now I can take those and refine them. So I've got my timing, and I have these key frames, these key poses that I can then, I mean, his arms go through the body there to get to the arms folded. I don't want that. Maya didn't know I didn't want that. Now I can go back and refine them, and that's what we'll talk about more in the second part of this tutorial.